Former senior U.S. intelligence official Norman Roule, thank you for joining Voice of America's Persian Service.
My pleasure. It's good to be here.
So my first question to you is about U.S. sanctions. The U.S. has been intensifying sanctions on Iran for months, including most recently sanctioning entities and individuals associated with what the U.S. says is Iran's past nuclear work. But Iran so far has been resisting any changes in its behavior as the U.S. has been demanding. Why do you think Iran has been able to resist these sanctions so far?
Well, I don't think Iran has been able to resist these sanctions. For example, we have the leader of Lebanese Hezbollah who's come out recently complaining of financial problems, and that's no doubt due to a reduction in Iran's funding to his terrorist organization. That's a great example of the impact of sanctions. No doubt other Iranian proxy groups in the region are similarly suffering. However, Iran continues to maintain a sufficiently robust economy that they could provide for their people were it not for the corruption, mismanagement, and their actions which provoke Western sanctions.
What kinds of strains are you seeing within the Iranian leadership in how they're dealing with the pressure of sanctions?
Well, they'll have great difficulty with sanctions. These are unavoidable. Iran will certainly have a propaganda that they are enabling to escape the pain of sanctions, but this pain is inevitable, and Iran is currently going through an unprecedented series of simultaneous crises: ecological, demographic, political, social. Sanctions will act as an accelerant and an aggravant on these situations, but sanctions in and of themselves aren't an end to a means. They're just a policy, and Iran's own problems is what the regime will have to deal with, not a problem created by the United States or its partners.
Well, what do you think it will take to get Iran to change its behavior in the way that the U.S. wants?
Well, in theory, the purpose of sanctions is to create a debate among Iran's senior-most leadership as to whether the prize, for example, their intervention in Yemen, their intervention in Syria, is worth the price they would have to pay of economic destabilization, political isolation in the world, diplomatic isolation that comes as part of sanctions. So what this takes is a series of multilateral diplomatic and economic pressures that in essence tells the Iranian people, you are entitled to your own form of government. You are entitled to live the way you wish to live. You are not entitled to threaten your neighbors. You are not entitled to change the DNA of the region with your proxy groups.
On to another subject now, which is the Golan Heights. The United States has said that it plans to recognize formally Israel's sovereignty over that area. Iran has protested and criticized this move, as you might expect. What do you think of how Iran has reacted, and what kind of message does this send to Iran?
Well, I think the reaction was entirely unsurprising. I believe Iran will use this decision to increase the propaganda amongst its proxy groups as a means to further increase their opposition of the United States, their anti-Americanism, their work against Israel. At the same time, Iran has been placing a massive number of proxies and surrogates and its own forces in Syria. The Israeli government has now admitted that they have conducted several hundred airstrikes against Iranian facilities in Syria. It's difficult right now in a world where you have Kataib Hezbollah officials, Iranian officials standing on the Golan Heights in the past, taking selfies, not to appreciate that Israel's security situation requires decisions such as this. So this is a problem that Iran, if it feels it's a decision it doesn't agree with, it's helped propel this decision through its actions in Syria.
Does this U.S. decision practically benefit Israel in any way as it pushes back against Iran in Syria?
Well, practically I don't think so, because Israel already has a sufficient military posture in that area to repel Iranian drone attacks, missile activity, or infiltration by Hezbollah operatives aided by Iran.
How concerned do you think Iran is about recent efforts by Israeli leaders to meet with Arab officials and diplomats with whom they share concerns about Iran's involvement in regional conflicts. Is Iran worried about an emerging Israeli-Arab alliance against Tehran?
Absolutely. And it's worried for several reasons, not just because of the diplomatic unity that brings and not just because of the economic coordination that might be able to bring, but in part because it also enables the economic revitalization of the region. One of the worst things for Iran is would be the policies of Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, respectively. They have become a gravity sink of economic progress and technology, whereas Iran's economy is sinking deeper and deeper into an almost the 1980s position. So for Iran to posture itself as a leader of the region, it won't be able to do so because of the economic conditions and the diplomatic and political stability of the Gulf. And this is something that is overdue. And by the way, you will not be able to solve, in my view, the Palestinian issue as well as some of the other regional issues without increased collaboration between these partners.
What obstacles do you see to the further strengthening of Israeli ties with Arab nations?
I feel sure that although there are interactions that have been discussed by each side and some official visits, such as Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to Oman, there have been such interplay in the past. A number of prime ministers have had previous interactions. Really, we will need to see progress on the Palestinian issue before we're able to see Arab-Israeli relations go to a higher level.
Well, let's end now with a look at the internal unrest within Iran. There were quite a few protests last year, some of them quite large, involving thousands of people. So far this year, there have been some, but smaller scale. What do you think the protests of the past few months in Iran, what do you think they say about the strength of opposition within the country to the government?
Well, currently the opposition remains leaderless, even rudderless, and lacking cohesive tissue between the various protests. At the same time, there is a common theme of despair and anguish among the Iranian people. You've seen activities among labor organizations to support environmental causes in the region. As I said, Iran is facing this unprecedented series of ecological and demographic and social and economic problems where the Iranian people are in essence saying, we've had enough. Why can't we live better than other people? I would like to note that in the January 2018 demonstrations, you didn't hear death to America. You didn't hear death to Israel. But you did hear a condemnation of the entire spectrum of Iran's leadership, from the hardliners to the pragmatic reformists. In essence, it was what in America we would call throw the bums out, an unhappiness with the entire spectrum of leadership. There are no new policies in Iran to fix this. This regime is undergoing unprecedented pressures.
But it's still able to arrest and jail dissidents. It's also used security forces in the past to break up protests. How effective has Iran's leadership been in using those tactics to suppress opposition?
Quite effective. And a difference between Iran now and, say, Iran in 1979 is, in 1979, the Shah and the military did not use the level of force they could have applied to the unrest for a variety of reasons. Human rights, their own views, et cetera, but in part because they had somewhere to go. Iran's current leadership has nowhere to go except the rubble of Syria. And for this reason, I believe they will be more willing to employ the most harsh measures, bloodletting, to retain their position. Also, since 2009, when Iran was surprised by the millions of people who protested the theft of the election that put Ahmadinejad in power, the Iranians have developed a system of internal dissent to combat internal dissent that is unequaled in the region. So I think they'll be able to sustain themselves. We should expect harsh activities, but this regime has begun to fray. Entropy has set in. Its leadership is quite old, and change will be inevitable.
What do you think it will take to get a serious change to Iran's political system?
Well, first, change in Iran's political system is a decision for the Iranian people to make. As I stated earlier, it's up to Iran, or the Iranian people, to choose their government. It's just not up to them to choose anyone else's government. And it's not up to them to hurt other people and to export revolution. What I think will happen is you will see a change of the generation. But this will probably bring about a more assertive, perhaps more violent, no less nationalist group of individuals who were not raised in the Iranian Revolution, but sort of were raised and brought up in the environment of the Iran-Iraq War and are used to high-risk, high-threat decision makings and losing many people in a conflict. So this would include individuals ranging from Javad Zarif, who bravely fought the Iran-Iraq War as a student in the United States for 8 years, and the head of the Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani, who bravely fought the Iran-Iraq War fighting on the front lines in the battle. So I think these people, in the next few years, we'll see more and more of them come to the forefront of power, and this will be a significant change.
Former senior U.S. intelligence official Norman Roule, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.